advance, and it's now a constitutional right. And of course, the question of implementation, I don't agree with anyone who says that we have overcome child labor given the sheer numbers in various centers. If you include those working in the organized sector, the unorganized sector, and at home, particularly girl children, the numbers are truly enormous. And a country like India, which has a high growth rate, still has a very long way to go before it can claim to be on top of the problem. This, I think, is widely recognized today, but we need to do something about it. I want to mention that there are many people who are equivocal about this, or have been in the past, and I want to pay tribute, like many of you did, to Kailash and his movement. He's been absolutely uncompromising about this aspect in particular. All children of school-going age, and I think we have to go up to the secondary level, ought to be in school. It's the duty of the state, it's the duty of parents and guardians of children to ensure that. But we do not have such a system in place yet. I was also impressed by the brief but powerful challenge thrown before us by Princess Laurentien of the Netherlands. I think when she spoke about go beyond knowing it, do it, and the other aspect is to scale it. This relates to, if you read the session brief, there's a demand for all of us. It says that the reality can change. This reality can change if modern societies, nations, and governments can work together to provide for all children, etc. Now, how do you make a difference by working together? This is something that intrigues me. Certain things are obvious, but how does a globalized effort by like-minded people, people who agree on the fundamentals, how is it going to change, and how is it going to meet the challenge that the princess from the Netherlands has thrown before us, avoiding any equivocation on the question, actually attacking the problem at its roots. And I think this is, I hope this is going to be some of the responses or remarks here that's going to address this kind of question. The broad topics covered have already in the printed brochure: ensuring universal access to good quality. The other issue is quality of education. Everybody knows there's a tension between providing access, opening your doors and gates wide, and not diluting quality, or what is the pursuit of excellence. Reconciling the two, striking a balance between the two. How do you do it? We can do it theoretically, but how do you actually do it on the ground, and how do you scale it up? And there is some research from India that shows, earlier the conventional wisdom was that poor parents did not send their children to school because they couldn't afford it. They had to help the family income. But recent research has shown, particularly in some Hindi-speaking states, that these poor parents who are not educated actually care about quality. There must be teachers present. You can't have one teacher for the whole school, and so on. And there's considerable research. Jean Dress and others have written on it. And this is somewhat hopeful because it goes beyond the argument of harsh realities that you've got to wait for a long time before you make a big dent on poverty or eliminate it before you can really achieve these goals. So I think some of these issues will come up where I'm interested in the role of the media, but I will be disciplined and not indulge myself on what the media can do. But the simple argument which Amartya Sen raised is that when there is typically about hunger, when there's this crisis hunger, as in a famine or severe drought, we are brilliant. The press has been brilliant at covering it. But when it comes to silent, endemic hunger, then we fail very often. Its coverage is very sporadic, and it's certainly not sustained or influential enough. These are some of the issues that I think are relevant here. But I'm going to now introduce the first speaker, a very distinguished speaker, the 27th Prime Minister of Australia, the first woman Prime Minister of Australia. We were ahead of you, Sri Lanka, India, and Pakistan. But Julia Gillard has great experience in this area. You look up her CV and she's done many things related to the theme of this summit: social inclusion, health, education and employment and workplace relations, and also a deputy prime minister, and finally the summit between 2010 and 2013. So it's my honor to introduce the former Prime Minister of Australia.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to get to speak to you, even if it is after afternoon tea when you didn't get any afternoon tea. But I hope the subject of education is keeping us sufficiently engaged and motivated. I want to start by telling you just one thing about myself. Despite this very Australian accent, I was actually born in the United Kingdom and migrated to Australia with my family when I was 4 years old, which just goes to show that in Australia you can be born somewhere else and end up Prime Minister. For any Americans in the room, I'd recommend this as a system. It saves a lot of time and a lot of arguments. My parents, growing up in South Wales, neither of them completed secondary school. My mother didn't complete secondary school because she was frequently unwell as a child. Indeed, she was one of 4 children, 2 of whom did not survive childhood. My father left school at 14 simply due to poverty. He was in a coal mining family in South Wales of 7 children, and they couldn't afford not to have him working. In Australia, I got a great education. My father ultimately became a nurse. My mother was a cook in an aged care facility. We were not a moneyed family. So the quality of the education I got depended entirely on how good the government school at the end of our road was. And fortunately for me, it was a great school. Not a school without flaw. It was teaching the young women of my era in part to be housewives. So when the boys were studying things like woodwork and electronics and metalwork, I was studying cooking, sewing, and my personal favourite, laundry, which puts me in the unique position of being probably one of the few leaders of a G20 economy across all of human history who can give you very reliable advice about how to launder a silk shirt. If you require that, I will be helping you later. But the purpose of telling you that story is to just show what a difference education makes to a life. My life would have been impossible to imagine if it hadn't been for that great government school. And right around our world at the moment, we know that hundreds of millions of children don't get to go to school or get to go to a quality school, and we need to change that. It's not just me saying that to you. We have already committed to do that as a global community through the Sustainable Development Goals. We've said we are going to get this done to make sure that every child gets a great education. So the real question for us today is not should we do it, but how are we going to do it? Fortunately, I'm here representing a body that Kailesh and I served on, an education commission led by Gordon Brown under the leadership of the Norwegian government. I commend its report to you. And it is a roadmap about the challenge in front of us and what we can do to make sure that every child goes to school. Firstly, the bad news out of that report. The bad news out of that report is if we simply keep going on the way we're going at the moment, then come 2030, the end of the Sustainable Development Goal period, there will be 1.6 billion young people in the world, and fully 800 million of them will not be on track to even get adequate secondary level skills. In low-income countries, only 1 in 10 children will emerge from their childhood with secondary level skills. In middle-income countries, only 4 out of 10 children will emerge with secondary level skills. And yet, this is in a world where we know employers will be crying out for higher and higher skill levels. Indeed, we already know up to 40% of employers say they find it difficult to recruit the talent they need. So, that's the bad news. We've got a very big problem to fix. The good news out of the Education Commission report is we can get this done. There's been a lot of talk about the Kennedys in the last session, Robert Kennedy, JF Kennedy. The good news out of the Education Commission report is this is not a JFK moonshot. This is not saying to the community, let's do something that human beings have never done before. Let's, build a rocket ship and go to Mars. It's not that kind of dream. What the report says is if each country managed to improve its education system at the rate of the top 25% of performers in its income band, then we would create this learning generation. So if the lowest income countries conformed to the best performers amongst low income countries, if middle income countries conformed to the rate of the best performers among middle income countries, we would create a learning generation. What's it take to get people to converge to that rate of change? Well, from those high performing countries, we know what the ingredients are. Ingredient number one, a relentless focus on the performance of your education system, not just in access, who's going to school, but in quality, whether or not the children are learning. And that must come with a relentless focus on the efficiency of the spend. Is every dollar going into education actually making a difference? Number two, a focus on innovation. This fast-changing world of ours gives us new potentials and new opportunities to roll out education in different ways. Not every classroom needs to look like the classroom that I went and did my schooling in. So an embrace of innovation can mean that this challenge becomes a doable one for us. Third, what we referred to in the report as progressive universalism, which is another way of saying the biggest gains are to be made if you start with the poorest children first. If you actually want to see your nation transformed, your learning statistics transformed, don't add another layer onto the elite who are already performing well. Make sure that the children who are in child slavery, in forced labour, in the slums, in the marginalised communities, the girls, the children with disabilities, the children from ethnic and language groups who are discriminated against. Start with those children and you will see the biggest gains. And fourth, we need to get the financing right. And let me give you some statistics about the financing. Currently, we spend on education for children in low and middle income countries from all sources, from domestic governments, from parental fees, from the private sector, from external aid flows. From all sources, we spend about $1.2 trillion. We need, if we are to acquit this challenge by 2030, to be spending $3 trillion. Now, that's a big step up. But it's a big step up that could be achieved if we saw developing countries committing to increasing their domestic expenditure on education at a rate of around about 6%, and if we saw the international community get serious about overseas development aid flows into education. And remember, the biggest source of funding for education by a country mile is what countries themselves spend on education. That is 97% of where the money comes from. The overseas development flows are only 3%. We need to see a step up in both. I am very confident that in this time of global change, we can still put a great case for education, because it is key, the evidence is increasingly clear, it is key not only to economic growth for the future, and the relationship between education and economic growth is very clear, but it is key if we want to achieve other development objectives. We will not achieve what we want to do in health unless we are educating children, particularly girls. We will not stop the AIDS epidemic unless we educate adolescent girls. We will not stop child marriage unless we educate adolescent girls. We will not ensure every child is vaccinated unless their mothers are educated, and we will not stop child slavery unless we are educating every child. What can we practically do as this fabulous network that Kailash has brought together? I think we can raise our voice in advocacy around this cause of education. And over the next 12 months, there's never been a better time The Global Partnership for Education, the multilateral body that works on school education in 65 developing countries around the world, needs your support at this time. We want to become a big, hefty global fund that is making a difference for education in all of these very impoverished places. And this is the moment that we can see that lift, that step up, that breakthrough. We know how to do it. The Education Commission report has given us the roadmap. We know we should do it. The Sustainable Development Goals have told us we should do it. The only remaining question is, will we do it? And I am confident with your support that we will get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker, another remarkable woman, Tawakol Karman. She's taken this up and has not been afraid to take on institutions, political institutions. And I don't know if all of you know that she's here because it's a close thing. She escaped an assassination attempt by somebody who came with a dragger very close to you. 2011.
Okay. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. I know that it's a long day, and tomorrow I have speech, so I will give very short speak, First of all, I am so happy to be here, and at the same time, I am so sad, so sad, because after 20 years, after the humanity wrote the conventions on children's rights, we still discuss the children's rights. We still discuss the right of the children for education, for health, for justice. It's shame on all the humanity around the world that until now we discuss how those children suffer around the world. I hope that one day we will discuss how did we give them many benefits, how did we give them their rights, how did we build a good current, not just a good future for them. Again, I will not talk a lot because tomorrow is my speech, and I want to be light with you, but you should know, in our great peaceful revolution in Yemen and in all Arab Spring countries, we raised the slogan of Mahatma Gandhi, which is peace. We opened the gate of peaceful struggle, peaceful sacrifices for peaceful future for our coming generation. So through the peace, we start dreaming for our next generation, and through the peace, we will build the world. Finally, you should know, when we discuss the rights of children for education, for health, we should discuss the right for children for justice. Justice, justice, justice. Those children who suffered from tyranny, from terrorism, from crimes under the absence of the international community, here we should be their voices. Hey, world, where is the justice? I will complete tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have some minutes in reserve. If you want to make comments later.
No, tomorrow.
Next, Dr. Uni Karunakara, former international president of the Médecins Sans Frontières. He's He's got tremendous experience in the area of health and also child health.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. All right, I'll try and keep this short, end of a very long day. I'm a doctor from Kerala, which is a state in the southern part of the country, and is a very good example for what can be achieved and what can happen when education and healthcare is available for all. I graduated as a doctor, but I was a humanitarian worker for the last 20 years. Now, Doctors Without Borders, the organization that I worked with for the last 20 years, is a medical humanitarian organization that provides humanitarian assistance to people affected by conflict, by neglect, by natural disasters, and also, of course, epidemics. Now, I think the first important thing I need to point out is that medical humanitarian assistance is emblematic of failure. We are there in places where communities are unable to resolve conflicts. We are there in places where governments are unable to meet the basic needs of people. We are there in places where the international community is unable to broker peace. In short, we are there in places where the politics has failed. Last year alone, we treated 10 million individuals in about 70 countries, and 60% of these are under the age of 5, 70% roughly under the age of 18. As we stand here today, children are dying from vaccine-preventable illnesses, severe acute malnutrition, and from the lack of adequate sanitation facilities. Half of all children that die of malnutrition in the world die in this country, India. India is a rich country, but of course, there are vast numbers of people who do not have access to healthcare or education. Today, we live in a climate of fear. And I think, everyone knows that politically we are going in a certain direction that also add to the fear that people face, people feel. Security concerns are often cited as justification for the violation of internationally accepted norms and conventions. Even in the countries where we live in, security concerns are cited as a reason to read your emails, listen to your phone calls. There's been an erosion of personal rights, so then it's not a surprise that we do not respect Geneva Convention anymore. We do not respect certain articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 4 out of 5 Security Council members today are part of coalitions that bomb hospitals. This year, just in a span of 3 weeks, between September and October, 320 children were injured in airstrikes in Aleppo alone. 110 children died. Today, women in Yemen are afraid to give birth in hospitals in conflict areas because hospitals are no longer safe spaces where people can provide care or people can receive care. So it's no wonder that people leave Syria, people leave in large numbers and cross borders to Europe and other parts of the world. Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly gives everyone the right to seek asylum when fleeing persecution. But of course, 4,500 people have died in the Mediterranean this year alone. Mediterranean Sea today is a mass grave. Many of them are children, right? They don't have to die. They die because we allow them to. Now, I can go on and on and on, but what is it that we need to do? I think many of the speakers have already laid out many steps that we should take. I just want to reaffirm a few of them. We must ask governments to reaffirm their commitment to protect and guarantee children universal access to healthcare by ensuring healthcare policies that are inclusive and equitable for all. Now, it is well and good to involve private sector, etc., but it has to be the public responsibility to guarantee basic health care and education for all in a country. This is not a responsibility that any government should abdicate. We also call upon governments and the private sector, pharma companies, for example, who produce life-saving drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics to ensure that these are available and affordable for everyone, especially children. The market today has failed the needs of poor people. We cannot leave all of the research and development for life-saving drugs, diagnostics, and vaccines to the private sector. The government has a big role to play, and the government must indeed show leadership in this regard. And finally, I'd like to call upon world leaders to protect medical facilities from being indiscriminately bombed, and medical facilities in conflict are the last spaces for humanity in troubled times. So the death of these safe spaces are a collective failure of humanity as a whole. As Madam Sadako Ogata said many years ago, there are no humanitarian solutions for humanitarian problems. The problems have to be political. There has to be political will, and there has to be a collective responsibility and a willingness to see it done. Thank you.
Next, may I invite Ratan Kumar Nag, Acting Managing Director of a game-changing movement, the Grameen Bank, which changed the game in certain respects, not only in Bangladesh, but for the whole region of which Bangladesh is part. So, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Getting from Grameen to all of you. Grameen is celebrating 10 years of Nobel Peace Prize and 40 years of establishment in this year. Initially, I would like to say very brief on Grameen Bank. Then I will discuss what Grameen is doing now according to the subject, healthy and educated children for creating better lives. Grameen was established as an action research project of Chittagong University Economics Department. Professor Yunus was the chairman of the department. He is the founder of the bank. In 1989, it became the project of Central Bank of Bangladesh, namely Bangladesh Bank. And finally, in 1983, it became individual bank under the law of the parliament. Grameen 25% share under the government and 75% share among the borrowers. Grameen loans programs are basic loan, means income generating loan, housing loan for shelter of the poor people, higher education loan for borrowers' children, and also struggling members loan, means beggars loan. Grameen has savings product like other bank, short-term savings, long-term savings. Another savings is Grameen pension scheme, GPS. It is very popular among the borrowers. Borrowers deposit money every month, one fixed amount. After 10 years, they will get one big amount. By this amount, they can accumulate asset and they can go for better treatment and all the things. So, Grameen has another insurance program, a scholarship program, all the things. So now I want to say what Grameen has a education program. Grameen Bank has a scholarship program for the borrower children. Every year, we provide 27,000 scholarship to our borrower children. From every branch, we have now 2,567 branches. From every branch, we provide 10 scholarship on 5 grounds: primary, secondary, SSC, HSC, and sports and cultural grounds. Among these 10 scholarship, 50% only for girls students, another 50% according to merit. according to merit. So every year 27,000 scholarship we provide to our borrower children every education year. Addition to this, a foreign scholarship also we provide for our borrower children. Khazana Foundation of Malaysia, they provide scholarship every year. 86 students now in Malaysia, they are studying through Grameen scholarship. Another scholarship, Asian Women University, they provide 36 scholarship. Seoul Women University, they provide 2 scholarship. And Glasgow Collodian University, they also provide a scholarship to Grameen borrower children. We have a higher education loan for our borrower children. Among the borrower children, those who are able to enroll themselves in engineering college, medical college, honors and masters, we provide them higher education loan. This is interest-free loan. We not say like this, but on study, no interest. After study, only 5% interest. We provided 54,000 students under this higher education loan. 1/3 of them already completed their study. They are now in some job market and some are doing their own business. Grameen has another program we called New Entrepreneurs Loan. Our slogan is, and Professor Nu say, you have to create job, you never seek job. So we provide them loan because their mother is the owner of the bank, they are the shareholder, so they can take loan from Grameen Bank. So if any engineer become the engineer, he can start engineering firm, he can create job for others engineers, and so he no need to go for seeking job. So another, we have 16 decision, socio-economic development agenda of our borrowers. In 1980, borrowers accommodated this 16 decision. If you analysis, thank you. If you analyze this 16 decision, you can see education issue, health issue, and some commitment, some awareness build-up is there. And Grameen, we also are providing health service to our borrowers and also non-borrowers. One organization called Grameen Kalyan, means Grameen Wellbeing. They are providing health service to the rural Grameen members and non-members. They have 100 medical clinics and they have a health assistant, doctors. Health assistant go to the village and they provide doorstep service. Especially, they take care pregnancy mother and they arrange eye camp, health camp, Shishu treatment camp all over the year. They have cataract operational program also. And another organization, they are Grameen Healthcare. They already established 2 eye hospital. In this eye hospital, they are providing especially eye treatment to our borrowers and also non-borrowers. So this is running program of Grameen Bank. I have no time. I have another others program also in Grameen. So I have to finish now. I want to thank Mr. Kailash ji to organize this summit. By this summit, we are more inspired and we have to do others step for our borrower children and side by side all children of the world. I think he is reminding us, Grameen future focus is the next generation of our borrowers, means borrower children. So from back from here, I have to think what things we can adapt, we can introduce additional to this running program. And again, I want to thank Mr. Satsatri to arrange and to invite me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the final speaker on our panel, Noriyuki Suzuki, General Secretary of ITUC Asia Pacific. ITUC is standing for the International Trade Union Confederation. He told me that he's going to tell us, among other things, on what they have been able to do in this area, that is the organized trade union movement.
Good afternoon. Brother Kailash, thank you for inviting our confederation to this very important event. The ITUC, International Trade Union Confederation, represents 180 million members in 162 countries in 333 organizations. Regional organizations, which I represent, they represent the almost 60 million members of 59 national centers. Of 60 million members, half is from India. We have lots of huge number of informal sector where people are suffering, and we see lots of child labor in that sector. We are happy to note that the child labor number is now 168 million from 46 million, considerable reduction. But it is shocking to note that such a large number of children are still toiling to feed their families and themselves as agricultural workers, domestic servants, weavers, rag pickers, mechanics, stone breakers, brick makers. They are deprived of their rights of childhood and education. Thousands of children are forced to be drug pushers and armed combatants. We, the trade unions, are now not aiming at reducing child labor, but total abolition, eradication of child labor. Wipe out this evil of inhuman dignity from the face of us. It is also a matter of grave concern that many countries have not ratified the two ILO conventions on child labor, Convention 183 on minimum wage and 182 on elimination of worst form of child labor. Their ratification is important to declare the will of the governments to eradicate child labor. Trade unions do not accept the argument that child labor is inevitable. Outright opposition to exploitation of children is one of the fundamental principles of trade union movement. Friends, we trade unions, workers are organized for the collective protection of the rights and interests of, and to protect from the exploitation and for the attainment of better wages and working conditions. The incidence of child labor always goes hand in hand with absence of full trade union rights, including freedom of association and collective bargaining. When these rights are enjoyed by workers, it will ensure absence of almost or virtual absence of trade unions. It will ensure the absence of child labor. The sectors and areas which engage child labor are also conspicuous by almost or virtual absence of trade unions. Where trade unions exist, we don't see child labor. With better wages and incomes, workers in the organized movement could offer better chances to their children and young school-aged siblings to education. Friends, as many speakers told us, universal compulsory free education to all is the key to eradication of child labor. Universal education should not be confined to paper. It should be implemented fully and without exception. Incentives like midday meals will really help in bringing children to school, as poverty is a main reason for the incidence of child labor, promotion of free and compulsory education for all children is an essential part of social safety nets. Now, friends, in the past 2 decades, in the developing Asia, the GDP per capita on the basis of purchasing power parity grew from 1,600 to 1,500. The record of annual growth is 7%. 700 million people stepped out poverty. Nevertheless, still 168 million children are working, something institutional deficits we have. The key factor is we do need a good taxation policy, fiscal policy, so that the economic growth, the result of economic growth should be distributed to a social development, and especially children. We need to mobilize political power to influence policymakers to change the situation. Once I visited two decades ago, a village in cotton field. Population of the village was 3,000. There's only tiny school. And we met a group of village leaders. And my question to the village leader was, what is the most acute problem? The problem of that village was acute, abject poverty. But he told me clearly, we need education to our children. This is a base for our policy formulation. No one wants your children, our children, to be a child labor. We want happiness of our children. We work harder. Once again, thank you once again for inviting us to this important event. And this is, I'm here to be here to reiterate our commitment to work for the eradication of child labor. We will continue our campaign to eradication of child labor. Thank you very much, friends. Thank you.
Thanks to the discipline shown by our panelists, I think there is time for a few questions or comments. Please keep them brief. Please introduce yourselves. And if it's a question to any particular panelist, indicate that. If it's a general comment, that's okay. Would anyone like to?
After whole decision, they are not interested.
Who? No. End of the day, no questions.
Yeah.
Yes? Give her the mic, please. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Mira. I'm 10 years old, and I would just like to ask Julia Gillard something. I know you briefly touched base on this topic, but I'd like you to explain a bit further how do you think you can take steps forward in order to supply all children with an education and victims of slavery?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is that on? No? Oh, there we go. Is that on now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mira, for that question. One of the things I used to do when I was in Australian politics is we would go community by community and have what we call community cabinet meetings. So we would invite 400 or 500 community representatives and they could ask questions about government policies. And the one rule that I and my cabinet colleagues used to know was if a child indicated they had a question, it would always be the toughest question of the night. So when you put your hand up, I was a little bit concerned, but thank you for a great question. I'm confident we can make change for education systems. One, because I've seen it done. I've seen the progress that is being made in a number of developing countries, and I think we know from around our world that there are nations whose progress can only be explicable to all of us because of the amount they've invested in education. I'm thinking of places like Korea and places like Singapore, which emerged from the ruins of war, from the Korean War, from World War II, and have built very prosperous countries with very advanced economies by investing strongly in education and putting a community premium on education. I've heard Jim Kim, who leads the World Bank, saying that there is a Korean saying that mothers say to their children, which literally translates as, "Study as if your heart is on fire." The value of education is so much moved from parent to child. So these things can be done. And if we know they can be done, the real question is, why aren't we doing it in all places? And partly it's resource constraints. We haven't raised enough money. Partly it's because the places that children miss out the most are places of fragility and conflict. Of the countries the Global Partnership for Education works in, 50% are fragile and conflict-affected places. And so sometimes you see progress made in education and then see it wiped away by conflict. But with all of those challenges, I think if we dedicate resources, technical know-how, community support, parental engagement, and the voices of children, then we can create strong education systems. And one of the great insights of the Education Commission report is it does take a whole system. It takes a whole plan. Many actors, parents, community, government departments, teachers, private sector, private philanthropy, and the list goes on. It takes many actors, but it also takes a cohesive plan. And if we have that plan, then systems can make a real difference in children's lives. And the evidence in the report's very clear that a properly planned, strong system in a low-income environment will outperform a poorly planned system in a higher income environment. So we can get this done, and I'm hoping that as a global community and partly through this meeting, we do rally and make sure that we achieve it.
Mira,
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a question. What are you going to do with these insights? Are you going to keep it to yourself or tell your friends, your classmates in London and others?
I'll tell everyone.
I think we can conclude now. I don't know. Oh, somebody's got her hands up. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks to this wonderful panel. One thing I suppose
Please introduce yourself. We'd like to know.
This is
Yeah.
Rashida Chaudhary
Yes.
from Bangladesh.
Thank you.
I am working for the National Coalition of NGOs and teacher unions in Bangladesh. So since morning we have learned that if we listen to children, many of our problems will be sorted out. That's what probably one of the commitments that we have to make to ourselves, that this forum, whether it could create a platform without borders, listening to children and making the governments accountable at the end of the day, because they are the ones who are making decisions and who are also committing blunders and then all the politics, etc. But how do we commit ourselves?
So perhaps if you require or if you ask children to work, maybe we can also give them the right to vote, maybe lowering the age of voting from 18 to 15. You know, if they're good enough to work, then they're good enough to vote. Just a thought. Sorry.
Anyone else? No.
Last one. Last end.
Yes, please. Introduce yourself, please.
Hello.
Mike.
Hello, it's going, huh? Yeah.
Do you have a
I'm
question?
Alok Mehta. I am from Hindi Outlook from India. I just wanted to ask and request from this summit also, can we also recommend or we can suggest that the countries like India and other countries which are spending a lot of money on nuclear missiles and other missiles and defense, more expenditure should be on education and health for the children. And the other thing just I wanted, because such a great scholars are here, that this, because of the digital revolution, the children are becoming not close to the family, but with the technology. Do you think country like Japan, China and India, traditional family always helped each other? How we can make the balance and how we can solve the problem of the digital world and only lonely children? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we can conclude. I don't want to summarize. I'll just recall a couple of points made or just touch upon them. First speaker, Julia Gillard, had a very strong focus on education as an agency for change, drawing from her own case, but also from the policy level. And I think that was extremely useful. It was a very strong focus on educating the child. And the next speaker, Ms. Karman, made some tantalizing reference to justice, through approaching the issue through the lens of justice. Justice, 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 she said. And she promised to, I think she'll elaborate on it in a speech tomorrow. So we're interested in that. Dr. Karunakara gave, apart from citing statistics, made a very strong case, putting governments in the dock for not doing what they should be doing at the basic level, and making the point that you can't leave it to the market, especially to take care of the needs of poor people, and the governments need to show leadership. Mr. Nag spoke about this remarkable movement, the Grameen Bank, with all its institutional arrangements at various levels, gave us a concrete idea of what it has been able to do, and that has certainly changed the situation on the ground. Some of the indicators from Bangladesh, for example, on infant mortality, show a remarkable improvement, and they've gone ahead of India, at least did at a certain point of time. And that was very useful, and Mr. Suzuki gave us a very useful account of how trade unions, what the interests of trade unions are, and how they take an uncompromising stand against child labor and what they can do. I think there was a great deal of clarity from the standpoint, based on practice, and that I thought was very useful. There are many other things that could be brought out. One obvious area, I think, which may not figure in this summit but could be taken up later, is the problem of the sex ratio, 0 to 6 sex ratio, on which there's a vast literature. Many countries in Asia, East Asia, South Asia have a problem with this. Amartya Sen and others have written on it, but surely it has something to do with the rights of children, because it completely disrupts the demographic balance, apart from discriminating against girl children or those who could be girl children. It causes all kinds of disruptions, dislocations in society and the economy. And this problem is, I think, a serious one, a grave one in some parts of the country, including India and some other countries in Asia. So I think that's a relationship between that and the theme of this summit perhaps can be teased out, at least briefly, in future sessions or discussions. But that's one thing that came to mind. I also, I think we could have a very good session, or at least a subgroup on the role of the news media, they've been able to do and what they've been unable to do and so on, but I will not dwell on it now. But these are possible areas, themes, or subjects that could be taken up, and we could learn a lot from that if you get the right participants. But thank you for this opportunity, and I must thank my excellent panel for the discipline they've shown apart from the insights they've offered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. N. Ram, for leading that discussion. Thank you for staying focused, and we need to continue to talk about educating our children and ensuring health care for them. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the proceedings for the first day of the summit. I have great pleasure in expressing our deepest appreciation for your attention, for your energy, for your cooperation, and your patience. We look forward to seeing you here tomorrow. Tomorrow the session begins at 9:15, so I'd like to request that all of you are here by 9 o'clock and in your seats by 9:10. And I look forward to being with you once again tomorrow morning. On my behalf and on behalf of Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, I thank you all for joining us. I'm Sukanya Balakrishnan. Goodbye.